And today we about to get into another one. We're about to find out why the music industry is
As listeners,
the
I think
biggest
many of
lie.
us tend to assume that the artists we are listening to are writing their own music, or at the very least, they're writing some of the songs. But throughout the history of the music industry, actually the majority of its history, most of the big artists did not actually write their songs, they just performed them. And while a lot of the time songwriters were credited, many other times they weren't, which people nowadays refer to as ghostwriting. Like I said, as listeners, we often tend to assume that our favorite artists are writing their tracks. But it's actually insane how little that is the case in mainstream music and how pervasive ghostwriting is in the music industry. So to truly understand the scope of this phenomenon, we need to look at the inception of the recording industry. You might assume that ghostwriting is more of a modern occurrence, but you'd actually be wrong. Ghostwriting has been a part of music since the very beginning. Mozart even worked as a ghostwriter, if you could call it that, where he was paid to make songs for rich people and then the rich people would just pass them off as their own. In fact, in the 50s and early 60s, when modern popular music was born, that was really the golden age of ghostwriting. Huge artists like Elvis or Frank Sinatra wrote virtually none of their songs, and in many ways, a lot of the artists of this period were mostly just performers and vocalists. Usually, songwriters were credited on the records, meaning it's hard to call them ghostwriters, but in a lot of other cases, they weren't. It was only recently, for example, that we
learned that there was a bunch of people writing the songs.
learned that many of Sinatra's songs were wrongly credited to a guy named Axel Stordahl, when
Literally, a bunch of people writing the songs. Oh,
in fact, some of them have been written by ghostwriters like George Saravo and Lowell Martin, who to this day are not properly credited. Even some of the musicians from this era who claim to write their own songs may have also been secretly using ghostwriters. Chuck Berry might be the father of rock and roll, but according to his pianist Johnny Johnson, he was also a fraud. Johnson actually sued Berry in 2000, alleging that he had co-written songs like Johnny Be Good and Sweet Little 16 with him, but received no credits or royalties, which resulted in him spending a lot of his life in poverty. The suit was eventually dismissed, and it did conclude that Johnson had helped Berry, but there wasn't enough evidence to prove his contributions were big enough to warrant songwriting credits. Plus, Chuck eventually got a taste of his own medicine when the Beach Boys pretty much ripped off his song Sweet Little 16 with their hit Surfin' USA. Although eventually Chuck Berry did get a co-writing credit and a cut of the
Took it just like that.
royalties from Surfin' USA. The same was not true, however, of the Beach Boys' hit Fun Fun Fun, which pretty clearly took a lot from Johnny Be Good. Overall, it seemed like the 50s and the early 60s had a much more relaxed attitude towards ghostwriting or properly crediting musicians. James Jamerson, for example, is today regarded as one of the greatest bassists of all time, playing on virtually every major Motown hit of the 60s and early 70s. But Motown only began crediting session musicians in the 1970s, meaning we don't actually know just how many songs he played on. Plus, many of the bass lines we think he came up with may actually have been the work of a different musician called Carol Kay instead.
Out here getting no credit.
All of this changed, however, when four guys from Liverpool came into the scene. The Beatles. In the early 1960s, the Beatles weren't the first band to write nearly all of their songs themselves, but they were so insanely popular that they kind of reshaped listeners' expectations around them. One of the Beatles' big appeals was their authenticity. They seemed like real people. Fans weren't just connecting with their music, but they also connected with the members as well. So in the wake of the
Yeah, they were really big. They were huge.
Beatles' success, ghostwriting and songwriters, separate from the artists in general, sort of disappeared across the industry, or at least it was a bit more low-key. You had artists like Pink Floyd, Queen, the Rolling Stones, and many more groups which all wrote most of their own music. In fact, the listeners' expectations had changed so much that in the mid-60s, we saw the first ever ghostwriting scandal, involving the Monkees. The Monkees might be a little bit forgotten by now, aside from a few hits like I'm a Believer, but at one point the Monkees were extremely successful. They were up there with the Beatles in terms of popularity, especially with their album More of the Monkees. They were so successful because they were kind of like the American Beatles. I mean, they even looked a little similar. Audiences, particularly outside of the US, would have no reason to think that they were different
That was the first ones that copied.
from any other band, made of a group of friends writing their own music. Unlike earlier releases from artists like Frank Sinatra, which listed the songwriters on the back of the album covers, the Monkees did not do that. But it turned out that the Monkees were a fictional band created for an NBC sitcom called The Monkees, and the band members were all actors who not only didn't write the music, but they didn't even play their own instruments. Their singing was the only contribution. The problem was that the Monkees album soon became far more successful than the Monkees TV show, and the music was sold in international markets where the show wasn't shown. Plenty of people people had assumed that they were listening to the work of a few normal guys from California, not a somewhat corporate attempt at replacing the Beatles, where the band members weren't even playing their own instruments. When people found this out, often they felt duped. As a result, the Monkees became deeply uncool. One writer described them as rock's first great embarrassment. Well, to this day, they have not been inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, which band member Peter Tork blamed on the music industry holding a grudge against them for not writing their own songs. So in less than a decade, the music industry had completely changed. In the 50s, songwriters and artists were, in the mainstream at least, almost completely different professions. According to one estimate, 80% of the songs from this era involved outside, often uncredited songwriters. But of the 5 best-selling artists of the 1960s, only Elvis had no involvement in writing his songs. The 70s continued this
It's just the performers. Literally, the performers were getting all the credit.
trend, and this is when ghostwriting sort of started to go downhill. Of the decade's 5 best-selling artists, Elton John was the only one who didn't write all of his own songs, and even then he played a role in it. The 1970s also saw the rise of the singer-songwriter led by artists like Carole King and Neil Young, and a big appeal of their music was the fact that it was introspective or confessional, with lyrics built around personal experience. So when a lot of popular songs deal with these things, having a ghostwriter is just, that doesn't work. But then the 80s began to see a shift back in the opposite direction. As pop music began to grow as a genre, distinct from rock and other styles, there was a lot less focus on authenticity and real personal experiences, but it was more on making a catchy hook and a good song. And probably the best example of this is Frank Farian. Frank rose to prominence as the songwriter, producer, and lead singer for the German Europop band Boney M, best known for their hit song Rasputin, and they became extremely successful in the late 70s and early 80s. However, if you look at Boney M's concerts or their marketing, Frank Farian, who looked like this, is nowhere to be seen. Understandably, Farian thought the group would be much more popular and marketable if he took a back seat in the group's promotion. He didn't have the dance moves or the good looks necessary to make a splash on something like MTV. Instead, the official frontman was Bobby Farrell, who was nowhere to be found on the group's album, but he did sing in concert. A few years later, it also emerged that backing singer Maisie Williams wasn't used in the studio either. The recording company wasn't trying too hard to hide Farian's involvement, but they didn't shout it from the rooftops, and nobody really cared, as this kind of thing was relatively common in disco, at least at the time. So in 1988, Farian decided to take it one step further. He set up the group called Milli Vanilli, a duo consisting of Fab Morvan and Rob Pilatus. Like with Boney M, Farian would write the group's songs. Like with Boney M, Rob and Fab were not in the studio at all. But unlike Boney M, they wouldn't even be allowed to sing in concerts either. Instead, they lip-synced to back tracks created by the studio musicians who were the group's real singers. And unlike with Boney M, as I'm sure many of you are aware, they went to great lengths to deceive everyone. The group's records even credited Rob and Fab as the vocalists, but then it all came crashing down in one extremely infamous performance.
No!
This resulted in a ton of backlash. There was already doubts about the group's authenticity since they weren't the best English speakers, but now there was solid proof and it had been exposed in the most humiliating way possible. As Rob later said, "I knew right then and there it was the beginning of the end for Milli Vanilli. When my voice got stuck in the computer and it just kept repeating and repeating, I panicked. I didn't know what to do. I just ran off the stage." Their Grammy was revoked, numerous consumer fraud lawsuits were filed, and their record company, Arista, completely deleted Milli Vanilli's albums from their catalog. But unfortunately, Rob and Fab became public enemies, rather than Frank Farian or the people behind Milli Vanilli. Rob and Fab maintained that they were the victims in this whole situation, which realistically they were. They said they signed a deal with the devil, with Rob saying the last 2 years of their lives have been a total nightmare. "We've had to lie to everybody, we are singers, but that maniac Frank Farian would never allow us to express ourselves." So in the public back then, there was still some backlash when it came to being deceptive or using ghostwriters, but that did not stop the growth of these practices. Michael Jackson and Madonna, the best sellers of the 80s, both extensively used outside writers. So did the 4 biggest artists of the 90s. However, by the time we reach the 2010s, singer-songwriters who composed their music on their own are pretty much dead. And of the
What?
10 best-selling artists of the decade, only Ed Sheeran and Eminem were penning all their own songs. The average hit song of the modern era credits 4.53 writers. Large writing teams in particular have exploded. I mean, Kanye West's song All Day has 21 credited writers.
Cara DioGuardi, Justin Tranter, and Ross Golan together are responsible for some of the most memorable pop music in the past decade. Last year alone, Golan and Tranter had 8 top 20 hits. 5 that went to number 1.
So how did this happen? How did ghostwriting go from being the biggest thing ever to kind of falling off and being hated to becoming another big deal where writing and ghostwriting both are extremely popular in the modern era? Well, probably one of the biggest drivers was simply the increased commercialization of music. From the early 70s to the 2000s, the revenue of music sales in the US has increased around 6 times. Ironically, people in the 60s didn't even think popular music would be a thing, with members of the Wrecking Crew, the most successful group of studio musicians from that era, believing that it would only last for around another decade. But obviously, this wasn't what happened. From the perspective of the major labels, the singer-songwriter model became increasingly seen as a barrier to greater revenue. An artist who writes all of their own songs can expect to demand a heavy cut of the royalty fees. And they can only write so many songs themselves, especially in between touring and promotion. And worst of all, they might decide to start following their own artistic vision rather than chasing trends and record sales above all else. Outside songwriters, however, have none of these problems. Teams of dozens of people can obviously put out music extremely quickly. Their lack of star power means you can get away with paying them less, and their
You don't need the one brain power of that one thing. You need all the all to put it together, and then the one person's gonna sing it because he knows how to sing it.
whole job involves learning to imitate and conform to whatever styles are selling best at that particular moment. As one anonymous music manager put it, I saw a pop star on TV once going, "I'm writing my new album myself," and I just thought, you stupid fool. You're a decent pop star, but you're not a writer. If you've got Max Martin writing you a song, why turn it down? The fact is that performing and writing are different talents. Speaking of Max Martin, you have producers and writers such as himself or Dr. Luke, who together are responsible for roughly 46 #1 songs. From artists like Taylor Swift, Britney Spears, Katy Perry, The Weeknd, Ariana Grande, Kesha, Doja Cat, Kelly Clarkson, Miley Cyrus, and many more. Now, throughout this video, I've been using the words writers and ghostwriters interchangeably, but there's definitely a difference. Ghostwriters aren't credited, and songwriters are. However, that distinction is becoming increasingly hazy. In the era of physical media, it was pretty easy to see who was writing the songs you were listening to, as pretty much every record would list the songwriters on the back. But you might have listened to, for example, To Pimp a Butterfly a few times without ever hearing the names Terrence Martin and Rose McKinney, despite the fact that they collaborated with Kendrick in writing multiple songs on the album. As one writer, Gregory Taylor, said, a lot of times people think, oh, they got the credit, so they're not a ghostwriter. But you kind of still are if it's not common knowledge that you worked on the record. And this isn't necessarily a problem. For example, large collaborative writing teams have resulted in some great albums, like Kanye West's My Beautiful Dark Twisted Fantasy being a great example. On a remote Hawaiian island, he set up what one journalist called Rap Camp, with dozens of rappers, writers, and producers collaborating.
That's fire. That's really, really fire. No, we was just in this. What? My bad, y'all. I just clicked the wrong button. Messing up some song.
Over many months, with Kanye's primary role being that of a musical chairman. The result was an album which credits in total. And Hearst was criticized for only drawing 5 out of 1,000 paintings. He argued, you have to look at it as though the artist is an architect, and we don't have a problem that great architects don't actually build the houses. Plus, the writing industry has created a lot of great job opportunities for aspiring musicians. Many successful musicians have also got their start in the music industry writing for other artists. Frank Ocean, Sia, Bruno Mars, and many more first got their foot in the door by penning songs for other people. And successful ghostwriters or songwriters are usually paid $10 to $20K per song. Credited songs get a cut of the royalties of any song. Big names in the industry can get paid even more, with MF Grimm, for example, who worked with the biggest rappers of the 90s, saying that he charged a rate of over $1,000 per every bar.
On top of this, famous musicians sometimes just like to write songs for fun for other artists.
Some of them are normal people and are just friends with other artists.
You were saying then that you were kind of mucking around trying to find reasons to write for people and see what
Yeah. I wanted to just write pop songs for people, so I kind of did that.
So ghostwriting and or credited writing are very common, and the line can get a little blurry. But like I said, it can create a lot of opportunities and job opportunities for aspiring musicians. However, there are also some problems that it can cause. And I don't think there's any genre where that's more truthful than hip-hop. It's not too hard to see why ghostwriting or writing teams are particularly controversial when it comes to rap music. As one music manager described, credibility is key in hip-hop. In R&B, for instance, the majority of the stories are about love and sex. They can relate to anyone. But 50 Cent rapping about being shot 9 times, that's personal. Rap lyrics should be hyper-personal and hyper-localized.
If I ever need a ghostwriter, I need to just fucking put the mic down. Anybody out here that does use ghostwriters, That's fine. If that's what you do, that's fine.
There are other reasons as well, like bragging about your skill as a rapper is a major part of hip-hop as well, and you can probably name a bunch of rap songs where people are doing this. Obviously, you can't brag about being the greatest rapper and then not actually write your own songs. The art of writing is also just far more integral to rappers than it is to other kind of vocalists. Lyricism is a core part of hip-hop where it's not
100%.
quite as important in other genres. You can be a great singer without ever writing your own lyrics, but whether you can be a great rapper without actually penning your own bars is a lot more debated. Historically though, ghostwriting has been integral to hip-hop as much as it has been in any other genre. Rapper's Delight by the Sugar Hill Gang, which is widely regarded as the first hip-hop hit song of all time, featured many rhymes written by the uncredited Grandmaster Caz. One of the group's members' managers had borrowed Caz's personal book of rhymes, and several lines from it were lifted directly into the song, without Caz ever being credited. Additionally, you might not know just how many rappers have written bars for other people. Nas, for instance, was behind Will Smith's Getting Jiggy With It. Method Man worked on Old Dirty Bastard's debut record, and Jay-Z actually wrote pretty much all the lyrics for the iconic Still Dre. As one journalist said of ghostwriting, it is the hip-hop apprenticeship, a way for a young talent to learn their craft and bring new life to fading stars.
A lot of ghostwriters in hip-hop are rappers who didn't make it. Not all, but a lot of them are rappers who didn't make it.
Right.
They was trying to go and they super nice, but
Super. Yeah, exactly.
it was something. Either their voice was weird, they look didn't really sell, whatever it was. They may be kind of an introvert. A lot of them are rappers who didn't make it, but their pen was crazy, so they just jumped into that.
These are 3 examples where the writer was actually properly credited, but since the stigma around not writing your own bars is far bigger in rap than any other genre, if they're ever accused of it, the rapper will probably deny it. Instead, it may be surprising to hear that Kanye denied this in the beginning of his career. On Barry Bonds Off of Graduation, he raps, "I don't need writers, I might bounce ideas, but only I could come up with some of this shit like this." This wasn't quite true though, and even on Kanye's first big hit, Jesus Walk, all of the lyrics were written by Rhymefest. In 2011, meanwhile, rapper Consequence credibly claimed he had written Champion and other tracks off Graduation without ever being credited. Meaning, who knows, perhaps even Kanye's bars about how he doesn't use ghostwriters were written by a ghostwriter. But later on in his career, Kanye had passed the point of caring. He openly admitted that he had only penned 2 bars on Violent Crimes, and all the rest of it was the work of a rapper and ghostwriter named Partisan Fontaine. You might think that Fontaine was happy about being credited, but he actually told GQ he was pissed, saying nobody needed to know. This is because he was trying to get his solo career off the ground at that time, and he didn't want these ghostwriting rumors overshadowing it, much like they did with Quentin Miller and Drake, but we'll get into that soon. This is another problem though when talking about ghostwriting in hip-hop. It's shrouded in mystery. Ghostwriters themselves are often reluctant to disclose the truth because not only do they sign NDAs, which legally prohibits them from discussing it, but if they're known to have a loose mouth, it could very likely damage their career. As ghostwriter Shaquan Lewis says, "I make more money when y'all ain't talking about ghostwriting. It's better business for me when nobody cares."
A ghostwriter is a person that writes records for other motherfuckers. I wrote some records for some motherfuckers, but guess what, Denver? They ain't paid me my motherfucking money, man. Ain't that fucked up? First of all, I didn't want to make this shit. There's a lot of rap niggas out here faking this shit. I'm a ghostwriter. I'm the cat you don't see. I write hits for rappers you like and charge them a fee. Don't get me wrong, dog. It's a cheddar that counts. But fuck Puff Daddy, cause this fucking check bounce. You know if I keep around no single...
And like I said, there's never been a more infamous example of ghostwriting than with Drake. Back in 2015, Drake and Meek Mill collaborated on the track Rico from Meek Mill's album Dreams Worth More Than Money. This eventually sparked one of the biggest rap beefs of the 2010s. Meek tweeted, "Stop comparing Drake to me too. He don't write his own raps." He later even said that if he had known that Drake didn't write his own bars beforehand, he would have never let him on that track, saying, "I don't trick my fans." Meek specifically identified an up-and-coming rapper named Quentin Miller as Drake's ghostwriter. Pusha T also referenced him on his track Infrared with the line, "It was written like Nas, but it came from Quentin." But it turned out that Quentin Miller wasn't actually a technical ghostwriter at all. He had actually been credited as a writer on 4 songs from Drake's mixtape. If you're reading this, it's too late. However, it is also possible and even likely that Quentin Miller did ghostwrite on some Drake songs and just never got credited. Miller himself actually accused Drake of not properly paying paying him, saying, "I never got a single publishing check off any song. I had to feed my family off getting paid under the table." This kind of thing is extremely common, and a lot of ghostwriters have been scammed out of their deserved earnings at one point or another. And Quentin wasn't happy with Meek Mill either, saying that he believed he robbed him of a big year, with his aspiring rap career being extremely overshadowed by his reputation as a ghostwriter. And Drake is far from the only rapper to not be writing all of his bars. Partisan Fontaine, that I mentioned earlier, also was credited as a co-writer on Cardi B's breakout single Bodak Yellow, resulting in her facing a lot of ghostwriter accusations as well. She clarified Fontaine was simply a co-writer, saying, "I do write a lot of my own shit. That's the thing." But later she went on the offensive, saying, "What you need to do is ask your favorite rappers about their ghostwriters." And later, all these rappers have writers, even the ones that be saying they don't. They lying. And this seems to be pretty accurate. As one ghostwriter said, "Dumb people can argue all day about whether or not ghostwriting is right or wrong because it really doesn't matter. The only thing that matters is that ghostwriting is the future of hip-hop because either you get a skilled team of writers behind you or you get run over by an MC who does." Even some rappers you might expect to do all of their own work could be guilty. There have been rumors for years, for instance, that MF Doom used his friend MF Grimm as a ghostwriter on some of his tracks. Lil Wayne has also faced numerous accusations over the years. So who do we know who's writing their own lyrics? Well, according to Forbes, industry insiders usually mention a few names, including J. Cole, Kendrick, Eminem, Jay-Z, and 50 Cent, and even then we can't be certain. There's no way we'll ever know if our favorite artists are writing their songs or not. They could have ghostwriters, and if they have writing credits, that writer could have written the entire song or just one line. Or maybe they just bounced an idea and helped them come up with some lyrics. There's really no way to know for sure. Although I can almost guarantee you that mainstream pop music especially is littered with writers and ghostwriters. So is it a good thing or a bad thing that a lot of artists may not be writing their own songs? Well, I think it does depend. There's a big difference between a Kanye bringing in a bunch of collaborators to make his album as good as it can be, and another rapper passing someone else's work off as their own. If you like this video, you might like my video about some of the craziest ghostwriting scandals where I dive a little.
Where everybody's a ghostwriter now. Everyone needs a ghostwriter, so I don't like it. I be writing my own music. If you made it this far, subscribe. We about to get into the next one. We out.
I'm the living truth, the living proof. You could be whatever. Never wanted fame, I wanted racks. Always wanted cheddar. You could try and steal my swag, but I'm up.